On tonight's show, we'll dig deep into the new revelations about the chemical weapons false flag in Syria. And I know you're thinking, Assad's already gone. Now's not the time. Excuse me, it's always the time for the truth. Except if you're 18 trying to convince a cop you're not drunk, you just have a wacky personality and a dented car. That is not the time for the truth. We'll also welcome to the show a special guest whose name rhymes with Cerny Banders. I'm kidding. Or am I? Click thumbs up because all that and more is headed your way right now. Welcome to Unredacted Tonight. I'm the most censored comedian in America, Lee Camp. I take you back to April 8th, 2018. Douma, Syria. Social media blows up with images of 2 chemical attacks on innocent people. This is back when if you saw a video online, you didn't just assume it was created by a 10-year-old asking AI to start some shit. Other videos also circulated of piles of bodies with white foam around their mouths. There's more viral video of people in a hospital being hosed down with water in an apparent chemical attack panic. Here in the U.S., if you're hosed down with water in a hospital waiting room, it's just because you don't have insurance and they're trying to get you to leave. So this was different. Enter the OPCW, the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons, the international group tasked with figuring out if these are legit chemical attacks, illegal under international law, or are they just knockoff chemical attacks made by a kid in Bangladesh, like Beyonce's fragrance. Up until this point, the OPCW had been largely viewed as unbiased and apolitical, like Tom Hanks before he did his Hicks Are Stupid SNL sketch, and also before he did 17 movies glorifying soldiers, the United States, and really anyone in uniform. Next month, he plays a mentally challenged crossing guard who sacrifices everything to save a family of ducks from a Cybertruck. The OPCW was so respected, it once won the Nobel Peace Prize. But then again, so did Henry Kissinger and John Benet Ramsey's parents, so maybe not a big deal. After an investigation that lasted many months, the OPCW came to the much heralded conclusion that the Assad government did indeed use chemical weapons on their own people. So the U.S. attacks on Syria were justified. The world's hatred aimed squarely at Syria was justified. The sanctions that put 94% of Syrians into poverty were justified. That's right, Assad, you killed some of your people, so now we'll show you by killing thousands more of your people with poverty. There's only one problem with all of this. Some whistleblowers at the OPCW have said the report was falsified. And just last month, longtime OPCW inspection team leader Ian Henderson put out a book, The Syria Scam, that gives the definitive inside story of what went down, which I think is pretentious of him to put out a book. If you want most Americans to never find out about something, put it in a book, okay? Americans now view books like the instructions to IKEA furniture. Yeah, you glance at them and then you ignore them and start swinging a hammer wildly. Despite that, I read the book and everything you're about to hear is from it. The Douma attacks basically consisted of 3 locations. 2 separate chemical cylinders, which had supposedly been dropped by helicopters, and then also a hospital where victims were being hosed down. Both cylinders created holes through the concrete reinforced roofs of the apartment buildings. One of them fell through the hole, bounced on the floor of the apartment, and landed on a bed. The other one stayed on top of the roof and leaked what was apparently chlorine gas into the building. There's only one problem. Wait. I'm going to rephrase that. There's only 46 problems. Let's go through some of them. The cylinder that landed on the bed was too big to have fallen through the hole in the roof. It was essentially impossible. Maybe it was a holy cylinder from the heavens, and there was a chemical miracle like Starburst candies. This apartment received the cylinder in a miraculous reception. Engineering analysis found there was also no way the cylinder could have bounced on the floor and landed on the bed. It simply didn't have the room and wouldn't have bounced that high to begin with. Trust me, nothing that heavy can bounce from the floor to the bed, no matter what the 101 Sex Positions book says. Word to the wise. Position number 38, a human face can't fit in there. Engineering analysis also found that there was no way the cylinder that stayed on the roof could have created the supposed impact crater and yet been mostly not smashed. Henderson wrote, I examined the cylinder twice to look for signs of a crater-forming impact with a reinforced concrete slab, scratches, imprints, or gouge marks from the shattering concrete and the snapped steel reinforcing bars. There were no marks. Canisters dropped from helicopters into cement rooftops, creating massive craters, tend to be totally wrecked, worse than Mickey Rourke's face. They don't just have like, oh, it's a little dent. No, they'd be messed up. They aren't made out of the same stuff as Superman's bulletproof nipples, okay? I wonder if he's ever hurt anyone with those nipples.
I've been thinking about that a lot.
The lab results found that there were trace amounts of chlorine in the buildings where the attack supposedly happened. The problem with that is that trace amounts of chlorine are found almost everywhere. They're in paper, coffee, cleaning products. Even your drinking water might have it. I mean, since most U.S. water has lead, hydrofracking chemicals, microplastics, and diseased and angry tadpoles, you might want some chlorine in there. Honestly, I add it. I just have a little sprayer spritz to my seltzer water. Point is, trace amounts of chlorine found somewhere means nothing. So Ian Henderson and his team came back and wrote a report that said the accusations of a chemical attack were hogwash, jiminy jam, flippity jibbity, or another word meaning bullshit. But oops, the OPCW final report somehow got changed. The words trace amounts became the words high amounts of chlorine. It was a miraculous alteration. The report changed itself. To me, that's as powerful as finding Jesus's face on your toast. That's never happened to me, but I did once find Jesus's taint in my egg salad. No local news stations wanted to report on it, though. I called them all. Moving on to the bodies that were at the scene. They moved. Another miracle? Various scenes had been rearranged during the night, with victims' bodies having been repositioned. For example, an infant was shown lying alone, followed by a later scene where the infant had been repositioned in the arms of a woman. Other victims at first didn't have foam on their mouths, and then later they did. This is clear evidence of someone trying to make it look like a chemical weapon attack. Or maybe it's just that death is relative. You know, for some people, it's kind of a real night or day binary thing. But for other folks, death is it's a process that you work through. You die and then you get up and you find a better position. You're going to be in that position for a long time. You want to pick a good one, you know. Then there's the fact that in a chlorine attack of this sort, the smell of chlorine would be very evident before the people succumbed to it. So any normal person's response would be to flee. Get the out! Yet several of the bodies were laid out near windows or open doors, but apparently they chose not to leave. Next up, there's the bodies found in the basement of one of the buildings. Okay, but there's a problem. The basement didn't have a door connecting it to the building. Instead, the door went to the outside. This means the dastardly chlorine gas would have had to leave the building out the door, then move along the sidewalk, maybe stop for a cigarette, maybe a hot dog, and then re-enter the basement through another door. This is truly horrifying. There's sentient chlorine gas out there, like the smoke monster in Lost. I knew that was a documentary. Let's move on to the hospital scene of panicked people being hosed down to try to save their lives. Many of the people in the video were later tracked down. One 11-year-old boy and his father had recounted the story that people had been quietly waiting in the hospital when unknown persons had come in shouting to start the chemicals panic. That's right. They testified they were not in a chemical attack. They'd just been in a hospital waiting area when the white helmets came in, started hosing them down and screaming about chemicals. The white helmets, as you might recall, are Western-funded anti-Assad emergency helper type people. For some reason, they're always the main folks involved in these bizarre chemical attack stories. But not to worry, they won an Oscar. I'm not kidding. Welcome to the Academy Awards, brand laundering U.S. imperial aim since 1929. Oh my God, is that the guy that played Steve Urkel? Although I guess it's appropriate for the White Helmets to win an Oscar since it is an acting award. Of the witnesses to these attacks, there were basically two sets. Those who had been evacuated to Turkey afterwards and those who had stayed in Douma. The ones in Turkey all said there was an attack. Everybody in Douma said there was no such thing. The ones in Turkey had very similar stories, almost too similar, as if they'd been coached. But it gets worse. Many of them describe very similar symptoms of a nerve gas attack, such as foaming from the mouth. But this wasn't a supposed nerve gas attack. No nerve gas was found anywhere. Instead, it was a supposed chlorine attack. But chlorine doesn't cause foaming at the mouth. The only thing that would explain nerve gas symptoms at a chlorine attack would be a very, very rare influx of people making up bullshit. Ian Henderson, who was fired from the OPCW for blowing the whistle, is far less cynical than me. Not sure how that's possible. I'm not cynical. I just believe that when someone gives you a gift, it's because it used to be theirs and they had bed bugs, and so now they're trying to pawn them off on you. Here, take it. You get the bed bugs. Oh, yeah? Yeah, this original Banksy is going straight in the trash, all right, asshole? Is that cynical? Anyway, Henderson spent years at the OPCW seeing it work effectively and without bias. So when things changed, he really refused to believe it. He kept thinking that eventually they would correct the report and admit the supposed chemical attacks were sketchier than the Boy Scout sleepover Stephen Miller's been having at his house. He's not in the Boy Scouts. Henderson, who was a key member for the fact-finding mission, FFM in Douma, got authorization to commission an outside study by engineers showing whether the cylinders could have actually fallen from helicopters. Unsurprisingly, the engineers found they could not. The shape and position of the cylinders made less sense than big, tough American right-wingers being terrified there might be someone in the men's room wearing a dress. If that scares you, wait until you find out about species collapse due to climate crisis. That'll really cause you to befoul your britches. Anyway, the OPCW higher-ups didn't want that engineering report getting out. It ruined everything. So they tried about 10 different ways to cover it up, and eventually it came to a head when the Office of the Director General, the ODG, asked to meet with Henderson to clarify some things. He emphasized that in his view, the engineering work was not authorized and therefore does not exist. Then, this was the second part of the ODG's key message, that in addition to doing unauthorized work, I was never part of the fact-finding mission in Douma. I was flabbergasted by this. Basically, when confronted with irrefutable proof by one of their top investigators that the Douma attacks were staged, the higher-ups at the OPCW said, the engineering report doesn't exist, and you don't exist. Real mature, guys, all right? That's like the prohibition of chemical weapons version of, I know you are, but what am I? Ultimately, the OPCW stuck by the fake report, but the hospital scenes concocted by the White Helmets are now widely accepted to have been faker than my college girlfriend's orgasms. Despite that, the current mainstream position seems to be, yes, the hospital scenes may have been staged, but that does not necessarily detract from the fact that there was a chemical attack in Douma. The did you just say? Sure, they were running around faking chemical attacks, but that's probably just because they saw the other real chemical attacks and they wanted to get in on the fun. No one wants to miss that. This is like saying, sure, Sammy Sosa and Mark McGwire were juiced out of their skulls, but that doesn't mean they wouldn't have hit 900 home runs in 1 year anyway. They only took the steroids to try to shrink their gigantic testicles. And then, of course, there's the motivation. The Syrian military and Assad had exactly zero reason to want to drop chemical weapons since they knew it would simply allow large-scale international movement against them. Most of the accused chemical attacks killed almost no one. Even the ones that supposedly killed people didn't take out large groups of opposition soldiers, so they achieved nothing militarily. However, the other side, the U.S.-backed opposition forces, have more motivation to fake chemical attacks than Diddy had to lie at his trial. The faked attacks get the U.S. and the West involved in their war against Assad. They get funding, they get sanctions placed on Syria, and they win the global propaganda game. It's all great for them. And sure enough, all those things happened in the end. It was their wish list. But what about the fact that there were more supposed attacks than just Douma? What about all those other attacks? Henderson said, I posed myself a question. Surely, with all these allegations, of which there had been scores, at least one of them would have been accompanied by something close to incontrovertible evidence. At least one, surely, would have provided the clear information that suggested, with a reasonable degree of certainty, that it had happened. I couldn't find one case with elements that were anything near convincing. To sum it all up, Syria can safely be added to the long list of false flags or disinformation that has laid the groundwork for U.S. wars, invasions, attacks, proxy wars, and unwanted touching. The Gulf of Tonkin incident in Vietnam, Iraq's weapons of mass destruction, Ukraine's Maidan coup, the sinking of the USS Maine leading to the Spanish-American War, Operation Northwoods, the foreknowledge of Pearl Harbor in World War II, and the cancellation of The Walking Dead after only 11 seasons. It was in its prime. We barely even got to know the zombies. What are their wants, their needs, their passions, huh? False flag. Besides playing a role in the ultimate collapse of Syria, putting in a former al-Qaeda offshoot leader as the new president, the capturing of the OPCW for U.S. imperial aims has had other ramifications. The organization will now be trusted less than Hillary Clinton talking about Russia or China or democracy or relationships or really anything, talking about anything, or Donald Trump talking about it, any of them talking about anything. We now live in a less safe world where there are no unbiased investigators to monitor chemical weapons use. Just a few weeks ago, the U.S. declared that they found the Sudan government had used chemical weapons in their civil war. So now the U.S. is imposing sanctions on Sudan due to this apparent use of chemical weapons. Well, is the U.S. right about Sudan? Probably not. We lie about everything. Well, who should we turn to in order to get to the bottom of it? The OPCW? Absolutely not. We know for a fact they just do whatever the U.S. wants. Well, then let's turn to the other respected international body designed to stop the use of chemical weapons. Oh, there isn't one. You see the problem now? We live in a world of horseshit. And the only organization helping us get to the bottom of that horseshit is now simply another gooey tentacle coming off of the U.S. military industrial bloodbath. It's like a bloody octopus tentacle that can't dig to the bottom of the horseshit. Good luck getting that image out of your head. And now it's time for Welcome to the Show. Please welcome to the show, Bernie Sanders. Bernie recently appeared on a podcast apparently hosted by a cartoon villain from the adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle. And in case you've been eagerly waiting a decade for Bernie Sanders to speak up about the primaries being stolen from him in 2016 and 2020 by Hillary Clinton and the entire DNC establishment, now's your chance.
I felt like the Democratic Party completely removed the democratic process from its constituents. And I think they need to have some accountability of that.
No argument here.
Whoa! No argument here. Nothing has been said with more courage and conviction than that mumbled, slightly garbled, no argument here. If only people like JFK or Martin Luther King Jr. had that kind of conviction when they spoke, then they would have really moved people. Rather than those sad rallies MLK held in front of 12 people at the laundromat. Had to get his parents to attend just to fill up some chairs. Yes, back in 2016, we were screaming at you, Bernie, to call attention to how you were being scammed, defrauded, bamboozled out of your primary win. And you ignored us. You acted like you couldn't hear us. And I have inside knowledge that your hearing aids were working fine that whole time. Then in 2020, we said, it's a trap. They're going to do it again. And wait for it. They did it again. And we said, Uncle Bernie, you have to call attention to it now. And you, wait for it, ignored us. Now, in 2025, you're on a talk show hosted by the kids in my neighborhood who claim they have a gang that meets up in a rundown shed behind the middle school, and you mumble, no argument, no argument. Little late, mother. The coup already happened twice. Let's see what else he has to say.
There hasn't been a fair primary for the Democrats since 2008. Are they not also a threat to democracy? Yes. We often hear...
Fair enough. That is, yeah, I'm not going to argue with that point.
We don't want you to not argue. We want you to be the one shouting it from the hilltops like a Mormon who just had a double espresso for the first time. You've been unfairly knocked out of competition, Nancy Kerrigan, if you will, for a decade now. And instead of fighting to be heard, you've just quietly said almost nothing about it and then mumbled, or little yachtied, if you will, on a podcast. Oh, yeah, our democracy is completely charade. It's absolutely true. Then why do you keep telling us to partake in it? You can't say it's all rigged and then the next minute yell at a rally of 10,000 people, get out there and vote. You can't play both sides. You're not polyamorous. Anyway, thank you, Bernie, for agreeing with what so many of us have been yelling for 10 years. One would think Doc Brown would be a little more on time than this. Get in your goddamn DeLorean, go back this time, and have some balls. Or some vaginas, since vaginas are way stronger. And now we're going to use our DeLorean to bring you headlines from the future. Coming up in July, you'll read, a new poll finds 35% of Americans haven't yet written their manifestos. Get on it, folks. No procrastinating. Coming up next week, we'll find out Wolf Blitzer, hoping he has at least 10 more years ahead of making news stories boring enough that Americans give up caring. Never has something called Wolf been that boring. Coming up in 3 weeks, we'll find out Israeli man can't believe he hid his love of genocide all these years without knowing everyone around him was into it too. Don't hide who you are, people. And coming up in August, the headlines will read, OPCW announces they have irrefutable evidence that every immigrant in America used chemical weapons. I knew they were up to something. I was at that taco stand. I knew they were up. I knew they were up to something. That's the show. But I have big news. Unredacted Tonight has joined the Means TV streaming service. Means TV is like Netflix if you want to watch stuff that matters. Plus, it's anti-capitalist, it's worker-owned. So here's how you can support my show and check out Means TV for free. Go to www.means.tv and click on Join to start a free trial. Then, when checking out, use the promo code LEE in all caps, L-E-E. That will get you 20% off if you decide to join. That site, again, is www.means.tv. They have Richard Wolff, Abby Martin, me, and so much more. So check it out. Quick note, because July is technically my off month, I won't see you next Thursday, but I'll be back soon. Until next time, the revolution will have laughter. Keep fighting.